Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our third and final session for this week's offering. This third session is going to focus on the planning guide for secondary school music facilities. And I'm going to walk through the presentation as we would give it to music educators and their administrators. There's a sister version to this presentation, in fact, to many of our presentations, that is an AIA certified course that our region sales managers present to architectural firms and other entities who are eligible for AIA certification points and continuing ed points. But the version I'm going to focus on today is the one that we present to music educators. And by way of a brief background, this planning guide came into existence in the early 1990s. It's been around for nearly 30 years now. And it was at a time when the state of Florida was building schools so fast they couldn't keep up. The demand was high, and every time they built a new school, they were starting from scratch. They were reinventing the wheel. And finally, the the educators in Florida and the architectural firms in Florida said, hold on just a minute here. We're killing ourselves building all these new schools. Let's put together a set of what they called ed specs. And the ed specs became the templates for building these new schools. They were the guidelines, if you will, the rules of thumb, that if you're going to build a school for high school students, and the school is going to accommodate 2,000 students and it's going to have these curriculum elements, well, here are the guidelines to follow. If you're in this area and it's for 800 students and it's a middle school, here are the guidelines to follow. So those ed specs became the template they used to build these schools. Well, part of that template focused on music rehearsal spaces. And for this guide, secondary school music rehearsal spaces. They wanted to know how big to make them, how to lay them out, how to design them in a way that facilitated music education as best they could. So those architects, those GCs, those music supervisors, music faculty, folks from Wenger, all sat down and developed what is called the planning guide. And it's something we're really very proud of. If you've been in sales for any length of time and you've seen CAD drawings, blueprints, floor plans, you've probably seen elements that have been incorporated that have come from this planning guide. And I'll talk about some of those during the presentation. So this is something that we've had for nearly 30 years now. We're very proud of it. We tried to get it out into the hands of the educators and their administrators early on in projects. So really from here forward, I'm going to dive into the presentation. And what we're looking at here is getting this out into the hands of the decision makers early in the process, even as early as what we call pre-planning. Now, for those of you that are familiar with construction projects, they typically walk through the similar process: pre-planning, programming, schematics, design development, construction, all the way throughout bidding, construction, and finally opening their doors. Earlier is better. This information helps them state their requirements of a music education program so that the design professionals can help build that into the plans. So one of the things that we try to communicate to music educators is to help them communicate to their administrators and design team what makes the music suite so unique. And in the music suite, students are learning by listening, probably more so in this area than any other area of the school. We have large spaces, large group rehearsal rooms, with large groups moving into and through those spaces. Big, heavy, expensive instruments are making their way in and through these areas during the course of a given day. And there are lots of different spaces. We have large group rehearsal rooms, ensemble rooms, private practice rooms, offices, storage spaces, lots of spaces, and many of those spaces have to support multiple activities. And then last but not least, this is a space that has very unique sound requirements. We're going to talk a little bit about the dynamics of sound and how to address those. So this is what makes the music suite so unique. Now, when this is done and done right, these rooms turn out to be tremendous spaces for students to be in, to play in, to sing in, to learn in. They become the place where they're preparing their pieces for concerts, for their performances. So before we get into the heart of the matter today, I want to take just a minute. This I always consider to be the money shot when it comes to acoustics. What you see before you is the acoustical footprint of speech and speech intelligibility. So in a place where teachers are teaching and it's a lecture format, people are speaking, this is the footprint of speech. And what you see along the left side are sound levels measured in decibels. The higher the number, the louder the noise. And on the bottom, hertz or frequency, okay, measured in hertz, sound waves, from the lowest of notes to the highest of notes. This is the footprint for speech. And I would say roughly from 20 to 70 decibels and from 160 to 2000 hertz. It's a pretty small footprint. Now, I'm going to lay on top of that the acoustical footprint of instrumental music. It's a dramatic difference. And this is why paying attention to the design of the facility can have such an important impact and positive impact on what the acoustics are going to be like in that space. Now, the technical matter is that instrumental music can be 64 times louder than speech. Okay, so that volume is a big deal. We have to find a way to deal with that and to make it less hazardous, if you will, to the ears and the health and well-being of the people that are in that space. And when it comes to hertz or sound waves, you're looking at a piano keyboard where the highest of the high notes have a frequency wavelength of 3.2 inches down to the lowest of the lows, 40.4 feet. That's a pretty wide range of frequencies to deal with. And these are things that we're good at. These are things that we're good at dealing with our products and our solutions, and particularly with the recommendations that are in the planning guide. So let's talk about the 5 critical factors that are in the planning guide. We're going to talk about the acoustics, floor plan, technology, storage, and finally equipment. So we're going to start with acoustics. Now bear with me on this one because it's the longest section. There are 4 elements to the acoustics section: cubic volume, sound isolation, acoustic treatment, and then finally mechanical systems. When people ask what is probably most important when it comes to planning the size and shape of the space, we say, well, there are 3 things that are very, very, very important. They are cubic volume, and cubic volume. You can't understate the importance of cubic volume. So why is cubic volume so important? Well, I'll start with when things aren't right. In a space that's too small, when a player is playing or a vocalist is singing, they're producing sound that's traveling out to the surfaces around them, and those reflections from that sound they're generating return so quickly to their ears that their brain can't process what just happened. There's no usable feedback in that action, okay? In addition, those rooms have very short reverberation times. There's really no life to the space, and as you might expect, they're very loud. There's no place for that sound energy to dissipate. So rooms that are too small just are not good spaces. So in a space that does have ample cubic volume, there's a slight delay of those primary reflections as the sound travels from its source out to the surfaces around the musician and then back to their ears. Their brains can digest what just happened and they can react accordingly. Are they flat? Are they sharp? Are they timing with their section mates and the rest of the ensemble? As sound waves travel, they also lose energy. And every time they bounce off a surface, they lose a little more energy. So the bigger the room, the more energy is dissipated into that room and the less loud the room can be. And then from a musician standpoint, in rooms that have ample size, you get this sense of presence and envelopment. The music just kind of surrounds you. It lives within that space. Not so long that it's the reverberation times are too long and distracting, but long enough that you know something just happened. So let's talk a little bit about calculating the cubic volume. The equation is simple. It's room width times length times ceiling height. But I want to talk particularly about ceiling height and how that can have such a significant impact on making this the right space. I talked about those early reflections, and the ideal length of time for those early reflections to return to the musician is 30 to 50 milliseconds. Well, sound travels at approximately 1,000 feet per second, or 1 foot per millisecond. Now, when you picture this, you have a performer that's sitting in a chair, their ears are 4 feet off the floor. You've got a room with a 20-foot ceiling height. When they produce that sound is going to travel up to the ceiling, 16 feet, back down to the musician's ears, 16 feet. That's 32 feet that sound has traveled for those primary reflections. Okay, that's 32 milliseconds. That's how that works out. Now, that's just into the range of the 30 to 50 millisecond ideal range. So when you put that to pencil to paper and you say, okay, well, we're going to build a room that's 44 feet by 58 feet by 20 feet, that's 51,000 cubic feet in that space in order to get us up into that 30 to 50 millisecond range. What does that mean when it comes to planning this space? These are some of the rule of thumbs that our planning guide states. For choral rehearsal, groups of this size, 16 to 20 foot ceilings, 1,800 square feet minimum. The equation is 350 to 500 cubic feet per student. And for band orchestra, this many students, ceiling heights of 18 to 22 feet, square foot recommendations, and how that works out to be for cubic feet per student. Now, there will be folks sitting around the table will say, oh my gosh, that's huge. Those are big numbers. Those are big rooms. Yes, they are. But it's very important that that cubic volume be maintained for lots of good reasons. Once all that preparation has been done, you're getting ample cubic volume. We always recommend, hey, be careful that you don't subtract from that cubic volume by putting things into the room that will subtract from that cubic volume. That's why in rehearsal spaces where there have to be cabinets, we use grill doors. These happen to be acoustic cabinets, perfect solution. These are seated risers. The air volume underneath these seated risers counts as part of the cubic volume of the room. And I say that because there was a day when it wasn't uncommon for them to put in poured concrete risers. And that tended to pose lots of problems, one of which was reducing from the cubic volume of that space. So just a quick summary on the cubic volume. That's really the foundation of good acoustics. There's a ripple effect that comes that if you get good cubic volume, lots of other things fall into place. Ceiling height is critical in making that happen. And then when we say utilize correct ceiling plan, we really highly recommend suspended ceilings. And in just a little while, I'll talk a little bit about a ceiling tile we recommend. And then either flat floors or built or portable risers, not built-in risers because they'll subtract from the cubic volume. Okay, let's talk a little bit about room shape. Now, there was a long-held belief that you should avoid building music rehearsal spaces with parallel walls. And the real thing here is you don't want to build spaces with untreated parallel walls. Untreated parallel walls could set up what are called flutter echoes. And flutter echoes are when a noise is made. Sometimes when you clap your hands, you'll hear a ka-ka-ka-ka-ka. That's a flutter echo. One shape we also want to avoid are building square-shaped rooms. Square-shaped rooms have a mathematical equation that when certain frequencies of sound are played, a standing wave is created, or resonant frequency, sometimes it's referred to as. And that particular note, that particular wave, makes the room come alive. It vibrates, it sounds louder. It isn't, but it feels like it is, and it distracts from the real sound of the space. And then to avoid creating parallel walls, architects can be pretty creative. They will build curved walls and dome-shaped ceilings. The problem is that at the center of the radius of that arc, all that sound is going to reflect back and create a hot spot. So it hasn't been uncommon over the years to see trapezoidal shaped rooms being built, lots of fancy things. I remember years ago hearing of a music suite where one of the rooms could have been the choral room. Looking down at it from the plan view, the bird's eye view, it was in the shape of a grand piano. Well, you can imagine that inside the arc of that grand piano, the sound right there was focused. It created that focus in the center of that arc that made it sound different than anywhere else in the room. And really what we're getting at is this. Music students develop a skill called critical listening. And critical listening is as it implies. They're listening to what just happened and they're making decisions based on that. Am I flat? Am I sharp? Am I articulating these passages correctly? That critical listening can only happen in a space that isn't too loud, that doesn't have hot spots or standing waves, that doesn't have flutter echoes, that doesn't have all these things that I just talked about. So what is the best way to do that? Well, the best way to accomplish that is just to build a rectangular space. Non-parallel walls are okay, but they just cost more. So why spend money on fancy architecture? With a planned dimension ratio of 3:2, avoid cubes, domes, and curves, and treat the space acoustically, which I'm going to get to in just a moment. Before we get to treating the space, let's talk a little bit about sound isolation. This can be one of the most contentious issues in schools, particularly where large sound-producing spaces are right next to each other, separated by a single wall. That's a tall order for a wall to stop the sound from going from one space to another. So we're going to talk a little bit about the best ways to isolate sound. One way to do that is to build really elaborate wall structures. Now here you can see how normal walls are constructed. It's studs and gypboard. To build a sound isolating wall can be done. It's just very expensive, very hard to do. And at the end of the day, if the electrical contractor comes in and pokes a hole through these walls to put outlets on either side, you've just coughed up some of the sound isolation that you paid so much money to get. Now, one other thing that is common, and we see it often, is that walls don't go all the way to the roof deck. You may say, what does that mean? Well, you can see here, you ordinarily wouldn't be able to see these studs or any of this infrastructure up here above the suspended ceiling because the suspended ceiling would have ceiling tiles in it. Well, I can tell you that if this is a sound producing room, sound is going to go right up over this wall into the next room because there's nothing stopping it. So the walls must run from the floor to the roof deck and be sealed on the top and the bottom. In this example, you see that very thing, that above the suspended ceiling, it's sealed at the floor and at the roof deck. One of the things that we often see, and this is one of the things we're most proud of from the planning guide, is that when you look at the space and you look at this rooms required within this kind of space, there's a way to align them to prevent sound from getting from large group rehearsal room to large group rehearsal room, because you can use other required spaces as what are called buffer zones. Here you see storage and office spaces between the band and choir rooms. That's a very effective way. You need these spaces anyway. Why not lay them out in a way that helps prevent sound transmission? Here's an example of a facility that has a rehearsal room on this end of this hall and a rehearsal room on that end of the hall. It isn't uncommon to have a hallway between the two. That can be done. That's not the end of the world, but these doors are definitely not sound isolating doors. And my hunch is that when this group is rehearsing and that group is rehearsing, they can hear each other. So sound isolating doors are very important. Now, generally speaking, these planning guide presentations are not commercials. I mentioned earlier that if we can get the planning guide into the hands of the music faculty, the administrators early on in the process, they can prepare, they can learn from that for when the time comes when they're going to sit down with their design professionals, their architects. When that happens, we're sitting at the table as a partner. We're a partner in the planning process. We're not coming in at the 11th hour as they're about to open the doors and try to sell them chairs and stands and risers. Yeah, we want to do that, but then we're just a vendor. We want to be a partner in the process, so we're trying to get involved early. So we try not to make these too much of a commercial. But we do talk about the fact that there are sound isolating practice rooms available, so you don't have to build them yourself. They have superior sound isolation. We tune them so that they're great spaces to practice in. They're competitively priced when you consider what it would cost to build a room that good out of brick and mortar. Furthermore, they're relocatable, and we have virtual acoustics technology available. So a great solution. So a quick summary on the sound isolation. Make sure that walls are sealed at the base and ceiling. Use buffer zones where you can. Wall construction matters. And be careful to communicate the importance of not poking holes through those walls to accommodate infrastructure. All right. This is the third element of the acoustic section. It's acoustic treatment. Now, the recipe for good acoustic treatment has two ingredients: absorption and diffusion. You mix the two together, put it in the oven and bake it at 350 for 2 hours, and you've got the recipe for good acoustic treatment. Okay, like that? Jeff, you can use that. Greg, you can use that. Feel free. Mary, any of you that are out giving this. So absorption and diffusion, they are what they sound like, sound absorption. In this example, we have sound being produced hitting a wall with no absorption. There are thin panels, and here are thicker panels. Now, as I play through this again, notice no treatment. The thinner panels only affect the higher frequencies, and the thicker panels do a good job of affecting the high and the low frequencies. So thicker is better. Part of why we offer a 3-inch thick absorber panel. Now, diffusion is the scattering and blending of sound. It isn't just about absorbing sound, because when you have too much absorption in a space, the space is dry, it's dead, it's dull, there's no life. Diffusion is what scatters and blends, particularly the high frequencies. So if you're in a choral room where there's good absorption and diffusion, the S's, the T's, the bright sounds, those are going to be diffused and scattered in the space. So in a room where there's no diffusion, it's just kind of a mush. Where there is good diffusion, sound is getting scattered and blended, and the communication in those spaces is fantastic. When it comes to reverberation time, it is good to have some. It is good to have some reverberation. In choral rooms, the rule of thumb is up to 1.3 seconds. Band orchestra, 0.8 to 1 second. And then in the performance areas, we like a little more life. That's where the music is being performed. That's where all their hard work is coming to fruition during their performance. When they play, if you've been to a concert, you know that sitting in an auditorium can be a wonderful thing as that sound is coming out into the space and living out in that space. Now, you all know, because you work for Wenger Corporation, that we have active acoustic technology to help with those large group rehearsal spaces. This is VAE rehearsal, which is VAE applied to a large group rehearsal space. I'm not exaggerating when I say that this really transforms the acoustics of these spaces. And not only it transforms the acoustics, because you can, with a push of a button, make it sound like a different space, but you're giving the students instant feedback on what they just did, what their sound just did. There's record playback capabilities. When we install VAE rehearsal, we give them the ability to create a custom patch, and that custom patch is often their auditorium. So think about the logistics of that. If the director is able to walk over to the control panel, push their auditorium, and rehearse with the acoustics of their auditorium, They don't have to get up and move all their stuff down to the auditorium, rehearse, move back when they're done. It's a royal pain in the rear end to do that. So this really speeds the learning process. Okay, and we talked about the active acoustics being able to allow you to adjust the space to a different space altogether. So that VA rehearsal allows you to practice where you perform without actually having to go there. We have a wide array of performance environments to choose from, customize settings, record playback is such a powerful tool. And these are digital files that can be uploaded and kept or emailed off or used for auditions and so on and so forth. It's a great technology. I want to talk just briefly about Transcend, which is our active acoustic system for performance spaces. Now, I don't know that we have a whole lot of Transcend across the country, but the Transcend was really aimed at taking really poor performance spaces and making them much better performance spaces, and maybe not even necessarily the entire auditorium, but seating under the balcony can be really problematic. The sound you get there is very different than the sound you'd get out in the house itself. So I'm not going to get into the details on Transcend, but something we do tip our hand to. So a quick review on the acoustic treatment summary. That panel that I mentioned that we recommend for the ceilings, for the suspended ceiling, is a 1-inch thick tile. It has an NRC or noise reduction coefficient rating of 0.95, which is very good. We recommend wall absorbers of 3 inches. That's why we make them the way we make them. You can also use the room design to tip whiteboards forward or cant windows in their frames to give you more diffusion, so you don't have flutter echoes and parallel surfaces. We always recommend hard surface flooring. Over the years, people have said, well, I really want to put carpet in here. Well, carpet, why? Well, because it's going to be better acoustically. No, it isn't really. Carpet is a very selective absorber. It only absorbs the high frequencies. We recommend hard surface flooring, particularly in band rooms, because brass instruments have water keys, spit valves, they're known as. Marching band comes in from off the field. Now you've got stuff tracked all over your carpet. Hard surfaces are much better. And then active acoustics can really be beneficial. Okay, we're in the home stretch on the acoustic section. I'm going to talk briefly about mechanical systems. One of the things that can be a problem is the ventilation system. You can see here an array of practice rooms. Well, most stick-built practice rooms that are built with brick and mortar have air supply that goes from room to room to room to room. Guess what? When the sound is produced in this room, it goes from room to room to room to room. Now, there's a way to fix that by doing individual takeoffs and supplies, but that's very expensive. And then you still are relying on one wall between each of these rooms to keep sound from going. That's why we are so high on sound lock as a solution. Takes all of those problems out of the mix. This isn't so much an issue anymore these days, but fluorescent lights or tungsten lights can buzz or hum. It's just kind of an annoying thing. And I'll tell you, in the fellowship hall at our church, when the ventilation system kicks on, everybody in the room knows it. It's really annoying. So when it comes to ventilation systems, we always recommend demounting those from the structure above, not putting them up on the roof of that area, demounting them, putting them on spring isolators so that that doesn't become an issue. Whew. Okay, that's the acoustic section. We're going to move on to the floor plan. And when it comes to the floor plan, we're going to talk a little bit about how spaces should be arranged. And earlier I talked about buffer zones. So as you look at this graphic, you can see the large group rehearsal spaces. You can see buffer zones that are storage rooms. You can see there's a commons area. If any of you have had the opportunity to get out to Owatonna's new high school, you'll see a layout kind of like this, that there's a commons area with storage in it, practice modules, large group rehearsal rooms. Now theirs are separated by I think there are two walls between band and orchestra and one wall between orchestra and choir. So probably not the best solution, but they're making do with it. But when you think about how things should be arranged and placed, you have to think about things like traffic flow. Students come into this area, get their instruments, and move into the band room in a smooth traffic flow without having to go in one door and out that same door, creating a traffic jam. Can they come into the space, get their instrument, and go to a practice room during the day if they want to practice? Where is the music suite in relationship to the parking lot, the auditorium, the football field? Those are things just to be thinking about in those early planning and programming stages that say, okay, well, put this part of the building in close proximity to those. And then last but not least, it's a good idea for the teachers to be able to see out and into the areas. They're monitoring lots of kids every day. And while most kids are really good, prevention is the best medicine. That's the floor plan section. There are the rules of thumb in the planning guide for square footage and so on and so forth that they can use as reference. Tina, are you with us?
I think that she dropped for another meeting.
Okay, no, that's fine. That's fine. Let's talk a little bit about a new critical factor. This was not in the planning guide until not too long ago, but it has to do with technology. Now, while learning an instrument or learning how to sing and breathe properly or playing a stringed instrument, that isn't a highly technological process, but in today's classrooms, there's way more technology than there used to be. And so it's something to keep in mind. There in every classroom you walk into, there are projection systems, screens, ports for USB plugins, and you name it. It's there. It's something that didn't exist not too long ago. VA record playback capabilities. That's a really powerful tool. So VAE becomes a really important tool in the process. Internet connectivity, supporting remote learning. All these things are things that have surfaced easily within the last 10 years, I would say. Probably not so much before that, but think back to how things were done during COVID. It was, if technology didn't exist, the world would have stopped rotating when it came to teaching. And then talk about wiring and future proofing, because things evolve, technology evolves, and rooms that are set up to accommodate that technology serve the customers well over the long term. Okay. And I think it's pretty common today that school districts have technology officers. They have people who specialize in technology and technology infrastructure. So it's good that they have a seat at the table as well. Okay, folks, critical factor number 4 is storage. Now, storage, this is not a mocked up photo that was put here just to prove a point. It's a real photo that was put here to prove a point. And that is that over the course of time, we've seen messes when we go out into schools, instrument cases laying all over the place. I mean, this is instrument storage. This is an open trumpet case. Some other kid walks up, grabs a mouthpiece, walks off, and now this kid's out a mouthpiece. They can be chaotic and messy, disorganized. Here's the deal. Instruments are not cheap. The instrument value for a new high school is big. $500,000 or more in instruments. Today, when you buy a cello or a tuba or a violin, a lot of money is going into these instruments. When you consider instrument storage, I always recommend thinking of it as an insurance policy. It's an insurance policy that protects the investment of these instruments. And we do it well. We had a session just an hour ago with Nee on instrument storage. Our instrument storage cabinets are the best there are to be had, and they do that job. They store instruments. They store what we say they're going to store. They store them in a secure compartment, and they do it well. they protect that investment. Our cabinets have a patented acoustic design on the acoustic cabinets, wave doors, extremely durable. This shelf, one-piece blow-molded polyethylene shelf, has been around since day one. It wasn't too many years ago I reached out to our customer service department. Now, cabinets were introduced in 1985. So quite some time ago. We're coming up on 40 years of providing cabinets. I would say probably 10 years ago, I reached out to the two gals that were in our customer service team and I asked, hey, you guys have been here a long time. How many instrument storage cabinet shelves have we replaced? And they kind of chuckled a little bit and they said, I don't know, 6, 7, 6 or 7 shelves over that course of time because they're virtually indestructible. And you can say that with 100% confidence. They're also secure and modular in case they have to be moved. So when we're talking to customers about storage, there are lots of things to store: instruments, percussion, classroom materials, garments, robes, uniforms, concert wear. When you walk into these spaces, you see just exactly the tall order these directors have to store all the stuff they have: props and set pieces, folios, music library stuff. The list is long. And it's all valuable equipment that has to be protected. So when we talk about storage, we talk about ideally rooms have instrument storage has its own room. If it can't or doesn't, and you're going to put it in large group rehearsal rooms, that's where we recommend acoustic cabinets. But when these rooms are built, they should have an indoor and an outdoor. Traffic should be able to smoothly go into and out of, rather than singular doors where there's a traffic jam. And if the spaces are going to store large percussion, mallet percussion, particularly timpani, the doors have to be wide enough to get those pieces of equipment into and out of those spaces. Here are some examples of typical layouts based on common instrumentation. So a band of 100 instruments or 50 orchestra instruments. We have tools that help us determine what cabinets are required based on the instruments they need to store. I think our cabinet calculator has gotten a fair amount of use over the years, and it's served us quite well. So I always say plan ahead and plan for enough. It's just like at home. Can you ever have too much storage space? I don't think there is such a thing. Okay, last but not least, critical factor number 5, it's the equipment. You heard me mention earlier that the planning guide was aimed to serve as a tool to put it into the hands of music faculty and their administration early in a project. The earlier they have it, the better, because then they can communicate those needs to the architect. And in the planning guide, you will not say this room needs to be 35 feet by 26 feet and the door needs to go there. That's the architect's job. What helps the architects and why they're so receptive to this information is we're not telling them how to build a space, how to design a space. We're just helping communicate what the space needs to accomplish. And when you do that, you're a partner at the table. Now, fast forward, we have learned time and again that if we've gotten in early and we've helped them influence the design of the space, way more often than not, they're going to want to fill it up with our products. And the list of products is long. For all probably know most of them: chairs, stands, risers, storage of all kinds, and not just music, athletic, Air Pro lockers, Gearbox carts. If they have an auditorium, Diva shells, rigging, and the list is long. It's been years since we've done hey, if we were to do everything in a space that we could, what would the dollar value come to? I want to say at the time it was 1.5 million. And it's no less than that. It's probably closer to 2 these days, maybe more. That's a lot of revenue potential if we do it right. And this is what really opens the doors to doing it right. Getting in early, helping them plan early, understanding what the scope of the projects are, becoming a partner at the table, so that in the end, when they're looking to fill it up with equipment, we're there to help them with that. So what types of equipment are needed? All this stuff: library, risers, chairs, stands. So to emphasize one final time, early collaboration is important. That collaboration brings input from the design team and the end users. It's important to document the program's needs and be able to communicate that. And then we always recommend to the music educators, get involved early and stay involved throughout. Now, many school districts are very good at that. Um, it can be a challenge sometimes. There are districts that'll say, "No, I don't want your input. I'll call you when I want it. Sit tight," and that can be a tough row to hoe. But where we're able to get in and build good relationships, we find ourselves having a seat at the table. So, I am not Zach Barris. I'm neither as good looking nor as intelligent as Zach. You were stuck with me today. I'm just playing the role of Zach. That is the planning guide presentation. And we have about 10 minutes left. What questions would you have for me at this point?
Mike, I have a question.
Shoot.
If you could, there's just, I just want to talk about something that I have a problem with when I make this presentation. And I'd just like your input as to how to handle the question. Could you go back to that slide with the speech bubble?
Yes, bear with me for a second.
Okay. So if you advance to the section where it talks about the loudness in the room being 64 times higher.
Hang tight.
So my question is, 140 is not 64 times 60. How do you answer those questions? I try to avoid that section altogether.
Sure. It's a little bit like, and I may be getting this wrong. I'm not a particular expert on acoustics, but I think what happens, Dan, is it's like when there's an earthquake. They measured on the Richter scale, right? A Richter scale of 1, a Richter scale of 2, whatever. 2 is not one more than 1. It's like 10 times stronger. 3 is like 10. It's not it's exponential. It's not just straight linear math.
Okay. And I guess the other thing that I have a problem presenting. By the way, this was a fantastic version of the presentation. I give you kudos for having gone through that. But that slide I always have a problem presenting, and how do you deal with the question? Let's say that they don't have enough cubic volume, or they don't plan on having enough cubic volume. Do you just tell them, well, the room's going to suck? or
Yeah.
Michael, how do you deal with that?
I've approached it really in one way, and whether it's had a significant impact or not, I can't say for sure. But I try to frame it like this: you're going to pay X number of dollars per square foot. And that can be a sticking point for a lot of these projects because they base the budget to build a school on a cost per square foot, right? So they don't want to make it any bigger because it costs them more per square foot. We get that. There's a cost per square foot, but the cost to raise the ceiling another 10 foot is far less than building another 10 square feet of space. So if you can, the punch you might try to land is, got it, you're probably locked into a certain square footage. Would you consider raising the ceiling another 5 feet? That will gain you more cubic volume, and that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Michael, can I just add in a couple of comments?
You bet, Jeff.
Back to the footprint. Another way that you could handle that, Dan, is you could say, this is the illustration of why there's validation for a larger space. You don't even have to get into the numbers. Just talk about this is how much energy's used within certain areas of the school, say a library, an office, etc. But this is the amount of energy that's projected within a music space. And it's that aha moment. Just don't talk about the numbers. And that the visualization puts everything in perspective that we're trying to achieve, which is cubic volume. So that's an accurate, perception of it too.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah, and then the other back to your question on how do you get real estate? Look at the space. If there's a suspended grid up there, a suspended ceiling, see what they're trying to hide. Are they trying to hide ductwork? You could go back to that that slide where we're talking about, say, an NRC 0.95, a Shasta 1 inch. Maybe you leave out the suspended tile to hide the garbage up above. You open it up, or you can still count the plenum that's above, because it's going to go up into the plenum and then come back down. So you don't want to avoid that. That's another way of approaching it, because you can't buy them something that's not going to be there, but you can try to help them along the way. Just a thought.
Okay,
Thanks, Jeff.
thank you.
Jimmy, you had a question or a comment?
Yes, I was just going to say on that question about the decibels. So
Yes.
every 3 dB gives the effect of doubling or halving the decibel range. So a decibel range is a logarithmic scale. So a 3 dB increase would be the effect of doubling the sound pressure or halving the sound pressure if it's a decrease. Now, our ears can only hear about a 10 dB difference normally. So just because the SPL goes up 3 dB doesn't mean we obviously note that it's twice as loud. It takes more than that for our ears generally to note it, but that's where that scale comes in.
Perfect.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Greg, you had a comment.
Yeah, great points from everybody. And typically I think what Dan, you're asking, and Jeff and Jimmy, you responded, is regarding when we give these to architects. But also, as you mentioned, Michael, we do give them to end users. Just as an example, I met with a school a while ago, and it was a really rough situation. This helped to prove to them that they needed a new space. And they actually did go ahead and build a new band room onto the building to accommodate what they needed to do. So it doesn't always happen, but at least then it'll give you some ammunition for them to move forward.
Good. Excellent. Thank you. From the grizzled veterans.
If we
Okay.
have time for those grizzled veterans, is the sound, is the loudness issue usually the biggest sticking point when you present to an architect or a designer, or is there something else in here that sometimes causes some upset?
Jeff, you want to tackle that one?
It just depends on the project. It's sometimes one of the above. Sometimes you're putting 25 pounds of sugar in a 5-pound bag, but it's because you're putting the plans together 5 years early on a bond measure plan. And then all of a sudden you've got thousands of homes that have been built. And then all of a sudden the school that you planned for is too small and the space has outgrown it. So now you're into hey, my classroom's too small. And then the volume's not there. So it really depends. It's a project to project issue. So, yeah. And then sometimes there's a budget issue. They may try to sneak into some less expensive acoustics or value engineer some acoustics portions. Instead of a 3-inch panel, they may put some 1-inch panels up there. on the walls, or they may want it to look good with glazing instead of acoustic. So it might be too hot within the room, being live, not literally hot, but live. It just really depends.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. It's 10:50. We're officially at the end of our session. If there are more questions, I've got a little bit more time to hang on. Otherwise, if there are none, we will step away. Any other last questions or comments before we sign off?
It looks like it's it, Michael. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. It looks like Cole. Yes.
Fire away, Cole.
Sorry, I meant to hit the applause button. Not raise my
Cole,
hand.
please. No, excellent work, Michael. Thank you so much. That was very helpful. And thank you to everyone who stayed on. I see a lot of familiar faces who were on throughout the entire launch of LEAP today. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining any and all sessions. And we look forward to seeing everyone back in a couple weeks. Look out for an email with the updated topics for LEAP session 2. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.